everyone. Welcome to Friday the 13th. It's ECM, and this is Resistance Live, the 13th of June, 2025. This 24 hours, you guys, I don't even know. I mean, I had a moment last night where I was like, okay, I have to turn everything off because it's just too much. Yesterday was insane. And I know that many of you felt the same way. And we have so much to talk about today in the context of everything that went down yesterday and continues to go down this morning. So there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that fascism continues apace. And we're going to talk about everything that we've got on that front in the last 24. But in addition to that, there's some very good news and some very interesting things happening. And for those of you who have read my Substack this morning already, which you can find at newsletterwithecm.substack.com, know that already I kind of am feeling quite hopeful today in many ways. All right. First things first, today for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a light blue blouse. I have my gold hoops in. I'm a pink skin, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman. My hair is pulled back. I am in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart and coming to you as always from Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay. So everybody I think already knows this, but of course we had an incredible event yesterday in the form of U.S. Senator Alex Padilla being essentially pushed to the ground by thugs from DHS for trying to ask Kristi Noem a question in a press conference that she was holding in California in a building where Alex Padilla was already doing his job. Essentially, he was hanging out at the back of the press conference. Kristi Noem made statements about how they were there to liberate California from current leadership. Alex Padilla stepped forward to ask a question and was immediately manhandled, dragged out of the room, and slammed to the floor and put in handcuffs by members of DHS. Needless to say, the propaganda machine on the far right has been spinning out of control on this, but just so we're all clear about it, he was wearing a shirt that said he was a part of the U.S. Senate. The first words out of his mouth were, "I am Senator Alex Padilla." So there can't be any question about who he is or what he's there for. And that just simply did not stop them. Now, if you happen to see Jacob Soboroff, who I adore, who I had the pleasure of getting to know a little bit during the family separation policy in Trump 1, interview Alex Padilla last night, you know that this was very emotional for Alex Padilla for a variety of reasons, not just because he was brutalized and assaulted, but also because his own family has a history in California that mirrors the experiences of a lot of people who are being detained and unlawfully deported right now as well. And so his father was a short order cook. His mother cleaned houses. He is from those roots, rose up to be educated at some of the best universities in the country, became the Secretary of State of California, and eventually was nominated by Gavin Newsom to be a senator, and then was reelected by the people of California while I was living there. And I did have an opportunity to be in a group with Alex Padilla a couple of years ago, and I will just tell you, not that this matters, because, the racist spin on this is so out of control already. Oh, he charged at her. No, he didn't. He stepped forward to ask a question. He threatened her. No, he didn't. He stepped forward to ask a question. I just saw a replay of some right-wing neo-Nazi broadcast claiming that Kristi Noem was a fragile, petite woman and he shouldn't have stepped, they are trying to make him out as a Latino man to have been some kind of a threat. And having met Alex Padilla in that format, I can just tell you, not only is he very humble, he's also very gentle. Of all the politicians that I've had the privilege to meet in my career, he's probably the most gentle one I've ever met. So in addition to that, we have to see all of this through the lens of how the propaganda machine is spinning this, okay? Alex Padilla did nothing wrong. By the way, part of his job is to sit on the committee that oversees immigration in this country, in the Senate. So he was literally, just like Ross Baraka was doing his job at Delaney Detention Center, more on that in a minute, was literally just doing his job by stepping forward and to ask the Secretary of Homeland Security what she thought she was doing in the context of claiming that she was going to liberate California from the Marxists because they were interfering with ICE unlawfully raiding people's homes, workplaces, snatching them off the street. Again, I'm going to remind you all, you have to also think about how this would look if it was any other country. And I know it's really hard to do this from inside America, where we're all kind of indoctrinated with the ideas of free speech and, freedom to protest and all that other sort of stuff. This is without question the actions of a dictatorial fascist regime. And That's capped off by the fact that this morning, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has been trying to pass a censure resolution against Alex Padilla, not against Kristi Noem, not against the thugs that did this to a sitting senator, but against Senator Padilla himself. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. And, you know, people have asked me what can be done about this. Well, look, I mean, somebody asked me on the Patreon feed, can the officers be sued? Generally, no, because there is qualified immunity for police officers, including federal officers, acting within the scope of their duties, which is the argument that they would make here. Can they be charged with crimes? Who would be the person prosecuting, the entity prosecuting them with crimes? It would be the DOJ, which is currently under the purview, of course, Pam Bondi, and under the control of the Trump administration. Can Kristi Noem be prosecuted for all of these lies that she's making? No. Why? Because of the First Amendment. So, you know, one of the things that I want people to just understand here is that this is part of the problem with where we are right now. There is very little recourse, save the courts, meaning like in the form of actual injunctive relief, more on that in a minute also, to stop them from doing what they're doing. All right. And, you know, the other thing I'll just say here for the person in the comments who was like, why wasn't there any security for him in the building? There was. This is the other thing that's crazy about this. Apparently he was escorted into that room by federal officials. They knew he was there. And, you know, again, I have to remind you all of this. There is a reason why Ross Baraka, as a Black man, was the first person arrested by ICE as a public official seeking to get oversight, why LaMonica McIver, as a Black woman, has been now indicted by Alina Habba for 2 felonies and a misdemeanor for allegedly interfering with ICE, simply for asking them what they were going to do with Ross Baraka at this event at Delaney, and that the first senator tackled to the ground and handcuffed by DHS goons is a Latino man. Like, there's no mistaking what they're doing here, right? Because they're assuming, like, you know, and I just have to like ask you all to imagine this. Like, it would be a very different moment if they had done this to say, like, I hate to put it in these terms, but like Adam Schiff. And one of the things that has been really disturbing about this in the last 20 hours is that there, you know, Schumer's out there like, we want an investigation. Shut down the fucking Senate. Shut it down. Like, this is not a hard moment to make a decision about what to do. You have rules and you have protocols that you can invoke to do the right thing here. I don't want any more strongly worded letters. I really don't. I don't think anybody does. I don't actually find, for instance, these press conferences on the steps of the Capitol to be terribly compelling when we can't even get senators to stop voting for his nominees. When 16 Democrats crossed party lines yesterday to vote for a resolution supporting ICE in the House. Like, I actually want to see some action that kind of mirrors the action that's happening in the streets, because otherwise it's just words. It's just words. Okay, so on top of that, we had some very big developments yesterday with regard to the rollout of the National Guard in California that obviously directly relate to what Senator Padilla was trying to ask about. Okay, so just a little recap. We all know that President Trump federalized the California National Guard and sent National Guards people into Los Angeles, where they basically didn't have much to do except stand around in guard buildings. But they've now empowered them to go with ICE to do these raids, to pick people up from, you know, the Home Depot parking lot and their places of employment and their houses. Yesterday, Judge Charles Breyer of the Northern District of California, which, by the way, encompasses like San Francisco and other areas, issued a ruling that what President Trump had done was illegal. And yes, this is the brother of former Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, who we all know was a part of the liberal wing of the bench. If you don't, now you do. So very strongly worded opinion about the fact that President Trump had broken the law by federalizing the National Guard without going through the governor first, because that's what the law requires. That was immediately appealed within 25 minutes to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, for those who don't know, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals covers California, a bunch of states in the Pacific Northwest, and is generally perceived to be the most liberal circuit court of appeals in the country. Okay. They issued last night before midnight an emergency stay of the ruling by Judge Breyer. Now, who in our wonderful class wants to tell me what kind of a stay that is? because people were freaking out about it even this morning on the Patreon feed. Okay, it's an emergency temporary stay that expires on Tuesday. Why have they done this? To review the case. Again, longtime students of Resistance Live understand exactly how this works, right? It's a temporary stay. It is not a permanent stay of the lower court's decision. They are taking a few days to review the case. And this is very, very typical, okay? Now, once this pause expires, and presumably that means we are going to have an official ruling out of the Ninth Circuit by Tuesday, it will, of course, be appealed to the Supreme Court. And then we'll just have to see what SCOTUS plans to do with regard to this particular, yet again, incursion into and over the lines of federal law by this administration. All right. But I will tell you, I personally was quite pleased to see once again, the court standing up for this. And by the way, this morning, just a little minor sidebar, another federal court judge blocked Trump's EO that was requiring proof of citizenship to vote. So there continue to be pushbacks in the courts kind of nonstop. So that's the status of the Ninth Circuit case. Okay. This morning still was ongoing as far as I know by the time we came on live. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is being arraigned in federal court in Tennessee on charges that he engaged in trafficking, blah, blah, blah. And all of this stems from a traffic stop, I think it's in like 2017 or 2018, where he literally wasn't even given a ticket. So the charges are completely trumped up. They're claiming now that that traffic stop was part of some trafficking operation. And they're doing this to save face about the fact that they sent a completely innocent, accused of no charges, father, working man, to a concentration camp in El Salvador with no justification. He, of course, has pled not guilty to these charges. And when I came online, I was waiting to see whether or not he's actually going to be released on bail. So we'll have to see. We're awaiting like a development on that front as well. Also yesterday, a federal court ruled that Mahmoud Khalil, the Colombia organizer who has yet to meet his newborn son saved behind bars, could no longer be detained by ICE nor deported. Now, he has not been released yet because there's a little bit of a glitch in the language of the judge's ruling, but we are waiting to see whether or not he is going to be released in time for Father's Day. And there is an enormous, shockingly, celebrity outpouring of demand that he be released by Father's Day so he can spend his first Father's Day as a father with his newborn son. So again, more developments. Crazy, crazy stuff. All right, now we have to talk about Delaney Hall. So many of you know Delaney Hall is the privately run ICE detention facility that was closed during the Biden administration because the conditions inside were so deplorable. It had been a site of radical outrage in Newark, New Jersey during the first Trump administration when it was used for similar purposes, shut down during the Biden administration, reopened without permits from the city of Newark when Trump came back into office. Since that time, they have been housing detainees from New Jersey, which I will again remind you has the second highest per capita number of undocumented immigrants in the country after California. They have been housing detainees in Delaney Hall since then. Conditions at Delaney Hall have been really bad. This is one reason why Ross Baraka went there. Like, we've heard stories that people are being starved, that they are being denied water, that food is hard to come by even when it's distributed, and that it's full of bugs, that people are living in dirty conditions, overcrowded conditions, that there are no beds, they have to sleep on floors, the toilets are overflowing. This is one reason why Ross Baraka and those two, Bonnie Watson-Coleman and LaMonica McIver, went to Delaney Hall last month to try to get inside and see what was going on, because they have no permits to operate, but they're doing it anyway. And the word from lawyers and the family members of people who are being detained there are that the conditions are really dire. Okay. Last night, I was already in bed when this whole thing broke. It started to become known through immigration networks in New Jersey that there was an uprising underway at Delaney Hall, that 50 detainees had essentially risen up and were demanding release. And we then learned that guards had abandoned their posts. Okay, so I have to point something out here. When you have guards in a detention facility abandoning their posts because the conditions are so bad, that is an opening. Okay, we talked about this, by the way, in the context of the National Guard and the Marines earlier on in this week, that if we see defections from law enforcement because of what they are being asked to do, that's a sign that things are turning. Okay, so guards abandoned their posts. And as soon as this word got out, by the way, through a Rutgers professor, there was a Rutgers history professor who was there escorting family members into Delaney Hall to help them see their family members who were detained. And from the inside, they started smelling tear gas. So they tear gassed detainees inside a building at Delaney Hall last night. And this was part of how people started to become aware that there was this uprising taking place at Delaney. That resulted in protesters like streaming out into the streets in front of Delaney Hall. And the footage, because Status Quo News, which is sort of like an independent news source that shows up for events and protests and the like, had footage of what was happening there. So ICE folks started to arrive to try to address the uprising, and an SUV drove essentially right through a crowd. They got out and they physically shoved people away. They knocked them over, and then they ran over their own fence. So the SUV got inside, and then they couldn't move the fence because they had broken it. Okay. Meanwhile, the crowds are growing. There's tons of chanting. There's people outside literally talking to like a wall of ICE officers saying things like, "You're going to remember this for the rest of your life and you're going to regret it. Why are you doing this? Are your children proud of you? Are your family members proud of you?" Right? I mean, like real kind of like direct taunting on top of a whole bunch of F-bombs. And this went on for a number of hours, including after ICE tried to leave again through that broken fence. And protesters in Newark held up those orange plastic barricades that you see sometimes when construction is underway to literally try to stop the vans. And that resulted in tear gas, journalists being pepper sprayed in the face, physical assault to try to get the cars out. And eventually they essentially did the same thing. They literally cleared them physically by like shoving like old people and, you know, people who were standing there just trying to stop ICE from doing what it's doing out of the way. Well, this is a really interesting moment of resistance, because while all of that was going on outside, the detainees inside tore down an exterior wall to the camp. And as of this morning, we don't have an accurate count. The estimate is that somewhere between 4 and 9 people escaped. So one of the things that we have to kind of keep in mind here, right, is that this form of detention is not as stable as they're making it out to be. All right. It's not like when ICE is overrun with protests and uproar and, you know, bodies on the line about what they're doing to destroy our communities, to destroy families, to destroy lives, that the center can hold. Okay. And I have to say that this is not the first time I've thought about this. In fact, I've been having kind of like online conversations about this to some extent for the last few weeks. But, you know, it's time to start imagining what would happen if people actually decided that they didn't want detention camps where they lived, right? And were physically willing to do the work of making sure those detention camps couldn't function. Because, you know, I don't know, man. I don't think anybody deserves to be detained. And those conditions are horrific. And I understand exactly why it happened. So Ross Baraka, of course, still the mayor of Newark, put out a statement in the middle of the night last night that said, "We are hearing reports about the conditions inside. We're hearing reports that people escaped. We're deeply concerned about the fact that we still don't have oversight of what is happening inside Delaney Hall, that we can't get answers about the way people are being treated inside of it." And so all of this, as it stands right now, is yet another really important inflection point in the kinds of resistance that we're seeing right now. Absolutely something to keep an eye on from the standpoint of like what's happening. But, you know, I would not be the only person to point out by a long shot that, you know, if people decide they don't want detention camps where they live, this whole system can't continue. So, you know, everybody is needed right now. And lives are on the line. And, you know, I do want to encourage everyone to show up at a No Kings event tomorrow. I know there are people that are worried about the fact that their mayor is already rolling out the National Guard where they live. No Kings is, you know, supposed to be an entirely peaceful protest. And if things pop up here and there, without question, that's what the media is going to focus on. But I'm going to tell you something. I read a stat last night that not only are the number and volume of protests since Trump took office this time overwhelmingly larger than the numbers in 2017, including for the Women's March, but also that in 95% of the cases, those protests have involved no violence. So I don't think anybody should be under the impression that there is like some kind of massive threat to all No Kings events. By the way, there's more than 2,000 planned. ICE, DHS does not have the manpower to shut down every single protest across the country. That, by the way, is also something that's working in our favor. So I really want to encourage everybody to get out and go tomorrow if you are all able to do that. If you aren't, please remember, there are other ways to be involved. You know, stealth activism is real. I'm going to mention again, we have this webinar coming up on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern that you can still register for on the issue of stealth activism and how it goes hand in hand with direct action and public protesting. I will drop a link to that in the upper corner after the live is over so that you can register if you have not. All right. Okay. So we have to talk about something in the MAGA murder bill, which I spent a big chunk of yesterday's broadcast dealing with. And, you know, that has to do with the fact that there is a provision in there, which we've discussed a lot here, that initially, as it came out of the House, was supposed to stop courts from being able to use contempt to enforce injunctions. And that is purely designed to allow the Trump administration to get away with violating every single injunction that's out there against them, which at this point is more than 100. Okay. Well, the Senate, sneaky little bastards that these Republicans are, have snuck a provision into their version of the bill that is slightly different and arguably worse. Because it doesn't stop the courts from being able to use contempt, because pretty much every legal scholar out there has argued that that would actually be wildly unconstitutional and against the law. But what it does instead is it says that if you want an injunction to stop the government from doing something, you have to be able and willing to put up the money for the federal government to carry out what the injunction requires. Okay, so I'm just going to give you all an example of how this works. Present discussion included, okay? You want Kilmar Abrego Garcia released from CCOT, okay? You go into court, you say, I'm demanding an injunction to have this man who was wrongfully removed from the country, sent to a third-party place with no jurisdiction, no due process, no nothing. I want him returned to the United States. If this provision in the Senate bill becomes law, you, as that individual, his wife, his mother, his grandmother, his friend, right, family member, organization that supports him, right, you have to be able to put up the money that it costs the federal government to bring him back. And I'm just going to tell you, you know, anybody who's been following the plight of the detainees that were sent to Djibouti, who were supposed to be dumped in South Sudan in the middle of a civil war, you probably already know that that flight alone cost the federal government $135,000. So essentially what they're trying to do here is to keep injunctions from being enforced by anybody who doesn't have the money to pay for something like that, okay? Another example here of how this would completely stop things, right? You go into federal court, you say, I want this injunction that stops, I want an injunction keeping the Department of Education from policing school libraries, right? What they're going to do is say, you want to do that, you've got to put up money for every public school district in America to be able to stop us from doing it. So essentially, this is a de facto way where they're seeking to get around the constitutionality provisions of keeping people from being able to stop the Trump administration from doing what it wants, from executing on Project 2025 in every way. This, again, there's so many things wrong with this bill, but this provision, like, you need to call your senators about it today because they literally just snuck it in there this morning. And they need to know that we know about this and that we're not going to stand for it. That what they are doing is seen. It's not secret. You need to call your Republican senators in particular, okay? This is something that we cannot let slide. It means, for instance, for the ACLU wants an injunction. The ACLU will have to put up that money. The ACLU will go bankrupt if it tries to do that. So again, and I have to point out, who's got the money to do things like this? Billionaires. So, once again, this is arguably a provision that benefits the uber wealthy, right? They want an injunction that stops, I don't know, the IRS from doing something. They're going to have the money to put up for that. So we have to actually like really get loud about this particular provision because it's kind of disgusting, and it really will de facto end the enforcement of injunctions, the ability to even issue injunctions, because it's going to require that amount of money to be put up in advance. Okay. Nasty, nasty, nasty stuff. Okay. Last night, Israel attacked Iran. And this, again, this is not an area where I have a deep expertise. Okay. So I'm just going to say this. I know there's a lot of concern right now about retaliation from Iran. There's also very deep concern about the fact that Israel is saying that this is now a war, that this is not a one-off, that they have multiple strikes planned, that they intend for this to go on for months. This is a 6 months type of event. And, I do have to point out that, the Trump administration has not done enough to stop what Israel is doing. And so I'm going to kind of like leave it there. I know there's a lot of people who are worried about, because Trump is tweeting out things, not tweeting, but on Truth Social, he's tweeting out things that are like essentially referring to the possibility of global annihilation. And this is not a moment to have him or Pete Hegseth or any of these other acolytes with no experience in charge of our Department of Defense, our, any effort through the State Department to try to resolve something like this. We all know Marco Rubio is obsessed right now with, all the doings of deportation and isn't really doing his job, frankly, with regard to any sort of foreign relations. None of this is ideal. And so I don't really feel like we need yet another reason to be kind of freaked out at the moment. But there it is, right? That was like, one of the kickers on the top of the cake last night with regard to yesterday. Okay, so just a quick note on good news, because I did say there was bad news and there was good news. I really do think there's a lot of hope in the way that people are rising up right now. I don't want people to neglect the fact that actually what has happened has caused tremendous damage to the Trump administration, to their aims, and to their efforts to kind of like round up 3,000 people a day and deport them, as that's Stephen Miller's quota. Okay. There's no question that, by the way, the optics of what is happening are working. Okay. There's new polls that we talked about yesterday. The vast majority of Americans do not condone what Trump is doing from an immigration standpoint. And after yesterday, with what happened to Senator Padilla and the way in which things played out at Delaney Hall, I'm just going to tell you, I don't think they're winning this one, like at all. And one of the big questions I have right now is what happens if they continue to do it? What happens if they continue to exercise ever increasing amounts of violence against U.S. citizens? What happens if they continue to like send people into communities to snatch folks off the street? I'll tell you, by the way, there's an article this morning about some events on Long Island in the last couple of days where literally ICE officers had to flee because they tried to go into an elementary school, and elementary school parents came out en masse and were like, you will not do this here. No, you're not coming into our kids' elementary school to try to steal children away, right? No, you're not doing that, or to go after our teachers. So, again, these are folks who have maybe never been involved in any kind of direct action or protest. And that in and of itself gives me an enormous amount of hope. And there's other incidents happening on Long Island as well, where there has been immediate community uprising as soon as word gets around that ICE is in the neighborhood. So again, this is really good. And it is showing how weak the regime is in the context of what they're trying to do, because average everyday people aren't having it. And, if ICE officers can't get out of a building in downtown New York City like they couldn't yesterday, protesters blocked them in and they had to back up and stay inside with a van that was trying to take people to a detention center. If average everyday citizens can do this and do it everywhere, they're going to be stuck in their tracks. And then the question is, what happens next? I don't know. I said that this morning on my Substack actually as well. Like, we don't know what's going to happen next, right? We don't know. And, I personally will just say that it's very clear the immigration policy is having a tremendous detrimental effect on the U.S. economy, as we talked about yesterday. And who knows? Who knows what's coming next? But I will say I just have a lot of hope about the way in which American people are rising up. I think it's great. All right. I already mentioned that we do have this webinar coming up on Monday on stealth activism. I'm going to drop a link up here. I always point, I'm reversed for you guys, so I always point to the wrong side. I'm going to put it up here again after the broadcast. Please go out for No Kings tomorrow. Make sure that you go to nokings.org, find out where your local event is. Look at the safety protocols. They're going around. The ACLU has a bunch, okay? Look at the safety protocols. Understand who your de-escalation people are when you arrive. But please show up. It's really important, okay? And also, please take some time this weekend to, after you've done your protesting, to figure out what you're going to do next where you live. Like, what organization are you going to get involved in? What's your next step to help people who need to be in community where you live? All right. Because there's so much for all of us to be doing right now. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. I will be back live on Tuesday. There will be a very short progressive coffee hour this afternoon for our Patreon only subscribers. You can join us by heading over there and becoming a paid subscriber at 3 p.m. Eastern, because I have somewhere I have to be very soon thereafter with my kids. And other than that, we have a educational video coming on Monday on how to resist the Trump administration right now, which is really meant to be like to a very broad audience of people. So that will drop on Monday at noon Eastern. I hope you enjoy that and that it's helpful. I will catch all of you in our activism webinar on stealth activism Monday at 1. And I hope you all have fun at No Kings. All right. I will catch you all live on Tuesday, and I'll see you online before that. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.